The first thing Frank Sinatra ever did was refuse to breathe. It was a December night in Hoboken, and the room was too quiet. He was a massive baby, 13.5 pounds, and his body was slack in the hands of a midwife who had lost control of the birth. He had arrived feet first, stuck and fighting the whole way. To get him out, the doctor used metal forceps that ripped his left cheek, tore his neck, and mangled his ear. The damage was immediate. His eardrum was punctured. The scars on his face were deep enough to last a lifetime. But in that moment, the scars didn't matter because the baby wasn't moving. The doctor turned away. He focused on the mother, Dolly, who was hemorrhaging and close to death herself. The infant was set aside, blue and silent, written off as a loss before he had taken a single breath. But a third person in the room refused to accept that silence. Rosa Garaventa, Frank's grandmother, was a midwife herself. She did not wait for the doctor. She picked up the still body and carried him to the sink. She ran ice-cold water and held the boy under it. She slapped his back, using shock and force to demand a reaction. It worked. Air rushed in, and a cry filled the room. Frank Sinatra entered the world screaming, scarred, and alive only because someone refused to let him go. That night set the rhythm for his entire life. He grew up with a body that carried the memory of that struggle. The scars on his neck and cheek were not subtle. As he grew, people noticed them, and he noticed them noticing. He didn't hide from the damage. He learned to work with it. He studied how light hit his skin. He learned that if he tilted his head just right, the shadows could hide the marks. Later, on stage, that specific tilt became part of his style, a signature move born from the necessity of covering up a rough start. He learned about breath, too. A singer who knew how easily air could be taken away learned how to master it. He learned to hold a note, shape it, and release it exactly when he wanted, not when his lungs demanded. The control he became famous for wasn't just technique. It was a physical response to a life that began with a fight for oxygen. But the fighting spirit didn't just come from a traumatic birth. It came from the woman who almost died delivering him. Dolly Sinatra was a force of nature in Hoboken. She ran her house like she ran her political ward, with absolute authority. She was not a woman who whispered. She lived out loud. Dolly was arrested at least 6 times. She wasn't picked up for singing or pickpocketing. She was arrested for helping women end pregnancies that no one else would touch. In the tight, crowded Italian neighborhoods, she was known as Hatpin Dolly. It was a brutal nickname for a brutal reality, but it was also practical. Abortion was illegal and dangerous, yet women came to her because they trusted her to keep them alive. She had trained as a midwife, and she knew how bodies worked. She provided a service that the law forbade and the church condemned, but the community desperately needed. This work gave her power. She didn't just have secrets, she had gratitude. She turned that gratitude into a political machine. Dolly became a Democratic ward leader, the first immigrant woman in Hoboken to hold that role. Her job was to deliver votes, and she did it by the hundreds. She solved problems. If a family needed the coal, she found it. If a man needed a job, she made a call. In exchange, on election day, those families did exactly what she asked. Frank grew up watching this engine work. He saw his mother argue with police and judges. He saw her chain herself to City Hall for women's suffrage. He realized early that rules were flexible if you knew the right people. He saw that power wasn't about a title, it was about leverage. Dolly never held public office, but she could pick up a phone and change the future of the neighborhood. She taught her son that you don't ask for permission. You take up space and you make them deal with you. While Dolly was the noise and the fire, Frank's father, Marty, was the silence and the smoke. Marty Sinatra was a quiet man who came home tired. He was born in Sicily and brought to America young, carrying a name that was a liability. In the boxing rings of New York, promoters didn't want Italian fighters. They wanted Irish names that the crowds would cheer for. So, to get fights, Marty changed his name. He stepped into the ring as Marty O'Brien. It was a mask, worn for survival. He fought as a bantamweight, taking punches to feed his family. He had a modest record, losing more than he won, but he showed up. He learned that sometimes you have to be someone else to get through the door. When boxing broke his body, he found stability in the Hoboken Fire Department, eventually becoming a captain. The uniform gave him the respect the ring never did. Marty was illiterate. He couldn't read a menu or a contract. That shame kept him quiet. He wanted his son to have the one thing he didn't, a safe, clean education. He dreamed of Frank becoming an engineer, something solid with a steady paycheck. He looked at the Stevens Institute of Technology across the river and saw a future where his son wouldn't have to fight or hustle. Frank stood between these two powerful, contradictory forces. Dolly wanted him to be big. Marty wanted him to be safe. Dolly pushed him toward the stage. Marty pushed him toward school. But the school didn't want him. Frank was expelled from high school after just 47 days. The principal said he showed no talent for anything and called him lazy. It wasn't laziness. It was a mismatch. While other kids sat in rows, Frank was already organizing bands for school dances. He was hustling. When the expulsion happened, Marty was furious. He scolded Frank on the school steps, his dream of an engineer son evaporating in the afternoon sun. But Dolly didn't waste time on disappointment. She got him a job delivering newspapers, and, more importantly, she kept pushing him toward music. When Frank was 16, Dolly brought home a microphone and a loudspeaker. It wasn't a casual gift. It was a directive. She was telling him to be heard. She demanded that he outperform everyone else. Frank took that microphone and learned to use it like a weapon. He didn't just sing into it, he played it. He learned that with amplification, he didn't have to shout. He could whisper. He could make a room of 1,000 people feel like he was telling a secret to just one of them. He practiced in front of mirrors, copying voices from the radio. He sang in his parents' tavern, a place called Marty O'Brien's, where the name on the sign was still a lie, but the food inside was Italian. He sang for tips, dodging drunks, sleeping under the pool table between sets. He learned to read a room instantly. If the crowd was rowdy, he knew how to calm them. If they were bored, he knew how to wake them. This was his real education. The 47 days of high school were nothing compared to the nights in the tavern, watching his mother trade favors and his father command respect with silence. But there was one part of his history that Frank kept buried deep, a silence he inherited from his grandfather. Francesco Sinatra had come from Lercara Fritti, a town in Sicily that was not known for beaches or sunshine. It was a sulfur town. Men went underground into the mines and came back coughing, or they didn't come back at all. It was a place of hard dust and brutal choices. Francesco had left in 1900 because the mines promised nothing but an early grave. He chose the ocean over the sulfur, leaving behind his family for 3 years until they could follow. But you couldn't just leave a place like Lercara Fritti behind. The town had other exports besides sulfur. It was the hometown of Lucky Luciano, the man who would organize modern American crime. The connection was uncomfortably close. In that small Sicilian village, the Sinatras and these Lucianos lived on the same street, Via Margherita di Savoia. They were neighbors. Years later, when police seized Lucky Luciano's address book, they found the name of a Sinatra relative, Rosa Saglimbeni, written inside. It was a small line of ink that tied the world's most famous singer to the world's most famous gangster. Frank knew this. He knew that in America, names could open doors or slam them shut. His father had become O'Brien to survive. Frank didn't change his name, but he changed his history. When people asked where his people were from, he lied. He said Catania. He said Agrigento. He said anything but Lercara Fritti. He created a fog around his origins because he knew that the truth was dangerous. He was already hounded by rumors of mob ties. Admitting that his family came from the same dusty street as Lucky Luciano was a risk he wouldn't take, so he turned Lercara Fridi into a ghost. He never sang about it. He never told stories about it. He let the myths take over because myths were safer. This was the strategy he learned from his mother. Control the narrative. Tell the version that keeps you safe. It wasn't until decades later, long after his prime, that records and census pages revealed the truth about the sulfur town and the shared street. Frank Sinatra's career was built on this tension between revealing and hiding. He stood in the spotlight, exposing his emotions in songs about heartbreak and loneliness. He let audiences feel like they knew him intimately, yet he guarded his past with a fortress of silence. He was the skinny kid from Hoboken who wanted out of the shadow of the docks. He was the son of the midwife who broke the law to help women survive. He was the son of the boxer who took punches so his family wouldn't have to. When he walked onto a stage, he brought all of them with him. You could see his mother's defiance in the way he snapped his fingers at a band, demanding perfection. You could see his father's discipline in the stillness of his posture, the way he didn't move a muscle while delivering a lyric. And you could see the grandmother who saved his life in the way he fought for every breath, turning air into art. He wasn't just a voice. He was a survivor. He had survived a birth that tried to kill him. He had survived a school system that called him useless. He had survived the poverty of the Depression and the prejudice against his name. He took the street smarts he learned delivering papers and the toughness he learned in the tavern, and he wore them like a tuxedo. In the end, the man who sang My Way was actually doing it their way. He was using the tools his family gave him. Dolly built the engine. She created the drive and the ambition that fueled him. Marty taught him how to steer, how to stay calm when the heat rose, and the ancestors from the sulfur mines taught him that sometimes the only way to survive is to leave everything you know and never look back. Frank Sinatra never returned to the mines of Sicily. He barely returned to Hoboken. He kept moving, kept singing, kept climbing. But every time the lights went down and the room went quiet, he was back in that moment of suspension. A boy refusing to breathe, a family refusing to let him die, a choice made in the silence to scream, to sing, and to live.